Chapter 1. The Gold Standard. New York City, November 1933. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Elias Thorne stood under the dripping awning of the Empire State Building, watching the gray slurry of the street. It was 5 p.m., but the sky had been dark since noon, choked by the dual stranglehold of a coastal storm and the coal smoke of a million struggling hearths. He lit a cigarette, shielding the flame with a hand that shook only slightly, a souvenir from the Argonne Forest 15 years ago. The tremor was worse when it rained. The dampness got into the nerves, reminding his body of the mud, the trench foot, and the noise. "Paper, mister?" Elias looked down. A boy, no older than 10, wearing a newsboy cap 3 sizes too big, held up a damp copy of the Herald Tribune. "Keep it," Elias said, fishing a nickel from his coat pocket and dropping it into the boy's palm. "Don't spend it on gin." The boy didn't smile. Nobody smiled anymore. The depression wasn't just an economic state, it was a physical weight pressing down on the shoulders of every man in Manhattan. The stock market had crashed 4 years ago, but the debris was still falling. Elias turned and pushed through the heavy revolving doors, the warmth of the lobby hitting him like a physical blow. He wasn't here to marvel at the Art Deco brass or the marble floors that cost more than his childhood home. He was here to bury a man, or more accurately, to bury a man's mistakes. He took the elevator to the 44th floor. The office of Sterling & Co. was a mausoleum of mahogany and silence. The firm had gone belly up on Tuesday. The senior partner, Arthur Sterling, had taken the executive exit, a swan dive from his penthouse balcony, on Wednesday. Today was Friday, and Elias was the vulture hired by the creditors to pick the bones clean. "Mr. Thorne?" The secretary was packing a box. She had red eyes and the look of a woman who was wondering if the soup kitchen lines were safe for a single lady. "That's me," Elias said, shaking off his wet trench coat. "I need the ledgers, specifically the private accounts Mr. Sterling managed personally, not the firm's books, his books." "He kept them in the safe," she whispered, gesturing to the heavy iron door behind the empty executive desk. He was burning things before he went home on Tuesday, in the trash can." Elias walked behind the desk. The wastebasket was indeed full of ash, but men like Sterling were creatures of habit and creatures of ego. They burned the correspondence, but they never burned the math. To a banker, numbers were more sacred than scripture. If you destroyed the record of money owed, you destroyed the money itself. He cracked the safe. It wasn't hard. The combination was written on the underside of the desk drawer, 04-1929, the date the market peaked before the crash. A sentimentalist. Inside, amidst stacks of worthless bonds and a half-empty bottle of scotch, lay a black leather-bound book. No title, no markings. Elias sat in the dead man's chair. He opened the book. It wasn't a standard ledger. There were no client names, only codes. Eagle, Liberty, Rubicon. Elias was a forensic accountant. He could read numbers like a musician reads a score. He looked for patterns. He looked for the flow. And what he saw in the first 5 pages made his breath hitch. Huge sums, staggering sums. October 12th, $50,000 transfer to Remington Arms via shell company Beta. October 14th, $75,000 transfer to DuPont Chemical via Gamma. November 1st, $3 million reserved. Allocation, uniforms, logistics. Elias frowned. $3 million? In 1933, that was enough to buy a small country, or at least a very large city. He turned to the back of the book.
Tucked into the binding was a folded piece of stationery from the Waldorf Astoria. It was a note, handwritten in a jagged scrawl. "Sterling, the general is hesitant. We need to increase the offer. The bond sales must be accelerated. The man in the White House is destroying the dollar. If we don't act by the spring, the republic is lost to the socialists. Fix the liquidity problem, or we find a new treasurer. M.G.C." Elias ran a thumb over the paper. The man in the White House was Roosevelt. FDR had been in power less than a year, and the Wall Street elite hated him with a biblical fury. They hated his New Deal. They hated that he took the U.S. off the gold standard. But hating the president was legal. Buying $3 million worth of uniforms and weaponry was specific. Elias pulled a fountain pen from his pocket and did some quick math on a scrap of paper. Based on the uniform allocation, they weren't equipping a security force. They were equipping an army, roughly 500,000 men. "Jesus," Elias breathed. The office door creaked open. Elias slammed the ledger shut and slid it under the blotter on the desk. He looked up. Two men stood in the doorway. They were wearing wet raincoats and fedoras pulled low. They didn't look like bankers. They looked like the kind of men who broke bankers' thumbs. "Office is closed," Elias said, his voice flat. He reached for his cigarettes, keeping his right hand free. "We're looking for Mr. Sterling's personal effects. The executor sent us," the taller man said. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and a nose that had been broken more than once. "I'm the executor's agent," Elias lied. "I haven't called for any movers." The tall man stepped into the room. He didn't look at Elias. He looked at the open safe. "We ain't movers, pal. We're associates. Sterling was holding a book for us, black leather, about so big." Elias tapped the ash on the expensive rug. "Haven't seen it. Safe was empty except for the booze." The short man closed the office door and locked it. The click echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. "You're lying," the tall man said, unbuttoning his coat. He wasn't reaching for a wallet. "And you look smart enough to know that lying to us is a bad health insurance policy." Elias calculated the distance to the door. 20 feet, blocked by the short one. The window? 44 floors down to the pavement. He looked at the desk, the heavy crystal ashtray, the letter opener. "I'm a federal auditor," Elias said, banking on the bluff. "You touch me and the bureau comes down on you like a hammer." The tall man smiled. It was a shark smile, all teeth and no warmth. "The bureau, pal. The people we work for own the bureau. Now give us the book." Elias stood up slowly. He grabbed the bottle of scotch from the desk, Sterling's last comfort. "Catch," Elias said. He didn't throw it at the man. He threw it at the light fixture above them. The heavy glass bottle shattered the light bulb, plunging the room into the gray gloom of the twilight storm. In the sudden semi-darkness, Elias didn't run. He lunged. He hit the tall man with a tackle he hadn't used since the Army League football games. They went down in a tangle of limbs and wet wool. Elias drove his knee into the man's groin and heard a satisfying grunt of agony. The short man was shouting, fumbling for something in the dark. A gun. A muzzle flash lit up the room for a split second, the crack deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet shattered the window behind the desk. Wind and rain roared into the office, swirling papers into a chaotic vortex. Elias scrambled on all fours, grabbing the black ledger from under the blotter. He rolled over the desk, glass crunching under his boots, and grabbed the heavy brass lamp. The short man was silhouetted against the open door, trying to aim. Elias swung the lamp like a baseball bat. It connected with the man's wrist. The gun skittered across the floor. Elias didn't wait to see where it landed. He shoulder-checked the short man into the doorframe and sprinted into the hallway. "Stop him!" the tall man groaned from the floor. Elias hit the stairwell door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He took the stairs 3 at a time, clutching the black book to his chest. He didn't know exactly what he had stolen. He didn't know who GC was, but he knew one thing for sure. The war he thought he'd left in Europe hadn't ended. It had just followed him home.